Abracadabra. Good evening again, everybody, and welcome. So, this Thursday evening is the evening we alternate between koans and poems, and tonight we are doing poems. Theravadan women's poems, Susan Murcott. Actually, I have 3 books though, and there's a reason I have 3 books, which we'll get to. So, I've been working through this book chronologically. I'm going to take a different approach tonight and jump to a particular topic where I've pulled out 3 poems, and they're longer poems. Before I get to those though, I'll set the stage by pulling out this particular translation. This is a translation of the Terigatha and the Terigatha, which are the poems of male monastics and female monastics within the awakening poems of male and female practitioners from the time of the Buddha. And these are collections that are in the 5th large collection, the Khuddaka Nikaya. I pull this out because, for a reason, a sidebar reason, this book is translated by Thanissaro. Thanissaro is, I spent 2 weeks living in Thanissaro's, a little over 2 weeks I think, monastery out in California late last year. He is one of my very favourite teachers. He is profoundly erudite. His translations are profoundly insightful. His word choices, the nuances, his understanding of the Pali Canon is just second to none that I've met. It's an amazing insight. But he is very, very focused on the Pali Canon, and there's a cost in that. So, to get to the cost, I will talk about Ayya Dhammadipa, who is a Theravadan nun who has been over here to teach on a couple of retreats. She is a wonderful, wonderful human being, and she has profound insight into the Dharma. Before becoming a Theravadan nun, she's actually formally dual lineage, so she's advanced in the Theravadan lineage, and she is also a transmitted Zen priest. So she's a fully transmitted Zen teacher. And she goes by the name Konan Cardenas in the Zen tradition. So she was the Zen teacher, and then she decided she really had a hankering for the whole Theravadan thing. So she went to a vihara, a convent, and lived as a nun for a number of years. And within the last year, she made what was an extremely difficult decision to say, I just need to disrobe from that tradition. She loves the tradition, so this is so sad. And I'm not going to attribute reasons to her, I'm not going to put words in her mouth, but what I know about that tradition and things I believe are very difficult for Ayya, and things that she tried to work with and work through but ultimately had real difficulties with. She's a transmitted Zen teacher. She has students. She has a community. She's just able to kind of do what she wants when she transmitted. That's it. You don't have any. You're not accountable. You go and teach. So that's the world she was living in. And in the Theravadan tradition, it's very closed. There are the men and women, as we've talked about before, are treated very differently. There are something a little over 200 precepts. I forget the exact number for men. There are something over 300 precepts for women in that tradition. Women are subservient to any male in that tradition. So a nun who's been a practicing nun for 50 years would have to bow down to a newly ordained monk, male monk. So it's very hierarchical in that way, or very gender specific in its hierarchy in that way. And absolutes are difficult, so I'll just say the ability for female monastics to be in teaching roles, to take on students, to have the kind of role and responsibility that Ayya was used to in the Zen tradition, extremely limited. So we have real issues with these today. This is really a fascinating challenge, because as I said, this Thanissaro, he really is one of my very favourite teachers, and he's a very profound. His insight is absolutely amazing and profound. But on this issue, he goes back very much to the letter of the Pali Canon as it comes to us from 2,000 years ago. And from that perspective, it is black and white. The law, if that's the law says, these are the 300 precepts, these are the 200 precepts. The female lineage was broken, so that order is basically over. Now this is all a lot more nerdy than I have stomach for personally, so I don't understand all the ins and outs, but directionally, if you follow the letter, the convent order is very subservient, it's pretty much over, and it's, just dregs. So some of the poems we're going to pick up today go into some of the history of the time then and today, and of how we're kind of locked into a historic paradigm here, and how terribly unfortunate that is. So I'll leave that for now, and we'll come back to that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump to some of these poems. I have two translations here. This is the one we're working from, which is Susan Murcott's First Buddhist Women, and it's just a magnificent book. She's got a really wonderful narrative strung around it, really rich context. She's done a lot of research on the nuns whose poems are featured, which wasn't there in the original set of poetry, and she's put them in a really nice order, so it's a really meaningful translation. This one is done by a gentleman by the name of Maddie Weingast, and he actually lived in a convent for I think a couple of years, and these aren't really strict translations. I like them and they're very wonderful, so I'll use some of them tonight, but these are really rewordings of the stories. So what he did, he rolled around in the stories and he went back and forth with a couple of the nuns in the convent of Vihara about his translations, and ultimately just settled on this is a retelling of the poem. But the truth is, these are really retellings too, in a very important way. They're much more faithful to the original, but I have a copy of the old Pali text translation. I should have brought it tonight, but I have read it, and it is unreadable, because it's really pretty much more of a word-for-word translation from the Pali, and there is so much you need to put between the lines to understand what's going on that you really can't make sense of it. So there's some interpolation going on here anyway. Maddie's done a lot more interpolation. So we're going to start with a poem which is Supa. Now, Supa was a mendicant nun, and the thinking is that in the dim and distant past, before the Brahmanic traditions arose in India, men and women were much more equal. But for some reason, and it likely had a lot to do with the cultural merging of the Aryans coming south to the Dravidians, and just cultural minglings, and some shifts that happened there, which I don't know enough to get into. But there was something that happened there that caused this male-female balance to shift. And ultimately, over time, women became essentially, all women were like the lowest of the castes. So, all women, just universally, you were the lowest caste and you were just treated horribly. So, at the time, women would go off into the woods and become wandering practitioners, meditating, begging for food in the same way that men. And then stories like this happened. Actually, let's read this one, because Maddie's shorter. One night I was walking through Jivakamba woods when a man appeared on the path in front of me. I could just make him out in the moonlight. Those shapeless robes can hide your body, the man said, but they can't hide your eyes, like two moons rising over the Jivakamba woods. The man walked towards me. until we were face to face. He winked and smiled. I could have cried out. I could have fought. I could have run. Instead, I closed one eye and held up a thumb, like a painter measuring her subject. The man's smile widened, then slowly changed as I brought my thumb towards my face and dug the thumb into my socket and pulled out my eye. Yes, there was blood. Here, I said, taking the man's hand and gently opening it and placing the eye inside. The man looked at me as though lost. Then he looked down at my eye, the eye, my sister's. When we aim too closely, sometimes we miss. Close your eyes, see things as they really are. One night in Jivakamba, a man with the worst of intentions sat through all illusions and found his freedom. Why shouldn't you? So I recommend you actually get this book and read the version of this book. It's about 4 pages long, much longer, and they're longer. It's a longer poem, and there's a very nice dialogue going back between the two. There's a little bit of humour in there, and she gets her sight back at the end. She shows up at with Buddha and gets her sight back miraculously. But somewhere around this time, the Buddha, so the story goes, came to the conclusion it simply wasn't safe for women to go wandering in the woods. So as a practical matter, he said, I hate to do this, but we cannot have women associated with our order just wandering around in the woods unprotected, so that's not okay. So there's another restriction on women. You may like it, you may not like it, but I understand it. I understand why the person who notionally is accountable for everybody within this order would say, I am responsible, I can't let women put themselves at that kind of risk. In the name of this practice, we've got to disallow that. Very difficult, right? And we've got two different things going on here. One, we've got this grotesque cultural asymmetry, this grotesque risk for a little over 50% of the population. And then we've got the purely temporal and expedient, what do we do about this? We try and change it, but in the meantime we've got to help protect people. So now we come to today, right? Yes, it's unbalanced, but we surely look at that problem differently. And surely we don't have to say, women can't, blah, 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 blah. Surely the move today is a different move. So I meant to say earlier on when I was talking about the Theravadan imbalance, there is a conference in Asia, there's an annual conference, I believe, of the women in these orders, this Theravadan tradition. And Charlie Vogt, who is one of our elders council here, talks regularly on Sundays and Sunday Women's Circle and so forth. She has been talking about for some time, and I think is planning to see if she can gather a group. It only has to be a small group, like 4 or 5 would be enough. A group of women from Atlanta to go as a representation to that gathering in Asia in 2015, so that will be next year. And it's hopefully to make a change. If nothing else, it's a really powerful and important statement that this kind of stuff matters. This is a very divisive issue right now within the Theravadan community, because there are a reasonable number of people who, like Tanisara, say it's all over. The canon is clear. We can't do this. And there are a fair number of people who say, well, this is antiquated nonsense. We need to change this. So I bring this up because this is real today, folks. This is real today. Okay, let's go to, there's 2 more that make related points. Let's do this one first. This is also fairly long. It's nowhere near as long, but I'll read the version out of Susan Murcott because the ending of this poem is really wonderful. I'll read the beginning of this because the beginning of this is quite powerful. I hated my father, and I hated my mother for making him my father. I left home to get away from him, and then found him everywhere I went. So this is this tells you what's going on, right? Again, he's interpreting and playing with it a little bit. My mother and I found out we were wives of the same man. I was horrified. My hair stood on end, and suddenly the pleasures of the senses were vile and stinking to me. I loathed them and all the troubles they caused, where mother and daughter were wives together. Then pleasure was danger and renunciation was solid ground. So at Rajagaha, I left home to be homeless. Now I have entered the 6 realms of sacred knowledge. I know that I have lived before. The eye of heaven has grown clear. My hearing is pure, and I know the minds of others. I have great magic powers and have annihilated all the obsessions of the mind. The Buddha's teaching has been done. To show my power, I made a 4-horse chariot. Then I paid homage at the feet of the Buddha, the refuge of the world, and stood beside him. And then there's a short conversation between Mara and Upalavana, who is this person. Mara, you are just a child. Mara is death, devil, evil, incarnate kind of thing. You're just a child, standing alone at the foot of the flowering tree. You don't even have a companion. Aren't you afraid of bad men? Mara, so this is Upalavana. Mara, if 100,000 men as bad as you came all together, I wouldn't move a hair. What can you do on your own? Mara, I'll vanish, I'll enter your belly, I'll stand between your eyebrows, and you won't be able to see me. Upalavana then says, and she speaks for the rest of the poem, my mind is my own. I have walked the roads to power and discovered the great knowledges. The Buddha's teaching has been done. Pleasures of the senses are swords and stakes. The elements of mind and body are a chopping block for them. What you call delight is not delight for me. Everywhere the love of pleasure is destroyed, the great dark is torn apart, and death, you too are vanquished. I think this is just a magnificent poem. Because it starts off you just see the utter grotesquerie of life as a woman in this culture. Just horrible. And then she takes on a serious practice, commits herself to Buddha's teaching, and she follows that teaching and practices till she wakes up. And once she wakes up, my mind is my own. Everywhere the love of pleasure is destroyed, the great dark is torn apart, and death, you too are destroyed. She sees through everything, and nothing can harm that, because there's nothing left to be harmed. It's just exquisite. So this goes to the this comes out of that same culture where women are just worthless. It's just a sex toy, right? I mean, it's my child, it doesn't matter, it's my wife too. Just horrible. And yet within that, this woman was able to ground herself and enter this practice and pursue this practice and wake up. There's such profound hope in that. The last one I'll read, I think this is another one I want to just read the beginning of it here. Let's see what I'm going to do with this one. We'll read this one and then I'll make a point out of this. This is a nun. Isadasi. In the splendid city of Ujjaini, my father was a good merchant. I was his only daughter, charming and beloved. Then a rich man from Saket sent a man of a noble family to ask for me. My father gave me to that merchant as a daughter-in-law. Morning and evening I bowed to the feet of my father-in-law and mother-in-law. If I saw my beloved, his sisters, his brothers, or even his retinue, I trembled and gave up my seat. I tried to please them with every kind of food and drink, and gave to all the proper portions. I rose early and went to my Lord's room, having already washed my hands and feet, and on the threshold I came to him with cupped hands, bringing comb, mirror, soap, and ornaments, as though I were a servant. I dressed him and groomed him myself. I boiled the rice, I washed the pots, and I looked after him, as a mother would her only son. And though I was devoted to him, a humble and affectionate servant, who was courteous and got up early, my husband felt nothing for me. He told his mother and father, "I'm leaving. I can't live in the same house with Isadasi." Weingast, and I'm not sure of the authority for this, Weingast goes on and he makes that happen just again and again and again. And each time she's given away with a smaller dowry or for less. So again, from the same kind of culture, there's a particular nuance here, which is not only are women the lowest of the low, but they are also property. So these are poems that come out of a particular time and place where that caste system had shifted, or the caste system had emerged, and it had shifted so that women had become that lowest caste. And within that context, while certainly not desirable, I can see how rules would emerge to protect women, although making them subservient is somewhat different. But then we say, now roll that forward. Why are we still doing this nonsense? And what do we do with this today?